Hey, Chris.
Hello. Are you able to see me okay?
I can see you. Do you see the picture? I thought you wouldn't have a camera.
I was able to get one.
Wow, good job. Because that's the picture I put for Chris. You see it there? Oh, you don't see it. Oh, yeah, you see.
Elmsworth, is that the person's name?
Yeah.
Got a lot better than I do.
But you're much better looking than this guy. So let me put both you and myself in. Hang on a second.
All right.
There's me.
All right. Have to excuse my background there. I'd like to, if I had a green screen, I'd blot it out there. Just an old storage room I've got here that I'm using. All right.
Let me just hang on a second. Let me get you in here.
I can get that. That'll be all right.
I'm on the west side of the United States map, so this time of day is really bad for broadcasting because I don't have a room, and so even with my blinds down and the shades drawn, I still get the light coming in.
Sure. No, it looks good. It's fine on my end. Yeah, I've got the same thing. You probably see the black sheet I've got over my curtains there just so I can block out the light, you know.
Yeah. Okay, let me bring you in here.
Okay.
Well, I really appreciate you doing this.
Sure, not a problem. Always glad to talk to anyone who's interested in religion and faith and philosophy. You know, those boring subjects that we can't talk about at the dinner table. You know, religion and politics.
Yeah, well, it's definitely not boring for me.
Right.
Okay, so we are live right now, by the way, full disclosure. And I found you, Chris, on the YouTube comments section. I really try to ask people who are passionate about their beliefs to talk about it. And full disclosure for me is I don't believe the way you do. But maybe
you'll be surprised. There's a lot of people who don't believe the way I do. So I think you're in for a surprise.
First of all, how's my levels? Can you hear me all right? You're coming in through loud and clear, but people in YouTube land, am I coming through all right? Because last time I was too quiet on my last video I made. So I definitely...
Well, what I'm kind of worried about is I've got my speaker here next to my microphone, so I'm hoping there won't be any feedback or echo reverb effect.
Okay. But I like to have full disclosures up front. I believe doubt's a virtue. I think it's dangerous when someone says that they're 100% convinced of something and they can't be wrong. I think that's when people get their heads chopped off. I agree. I think that's when violence begins. I think when I say doubt's a virtue, what I mean by that is that you should be open to being wrong. And I think when you do that, you tend to be more humble about things. So yeah, that's my full disclosure. I used to be a Christian for 30 plus years, professing Christian if you happen to be a Calvinist. And but I am no longer. I started doubting in my mid-30s. Was a deist for a few years, and now I call myself an agnostic atheist, but that's just a label which some people get mad at.
Because you don't know if you're an atheist or not?
I don't know if the claims that you might have are true. I say I basically reject them. I'm not a theist. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
So give me like a 60-second summary of your life. Who are you? You don't have to tell me exactly where you're from, but you know, what part of the world are you in? And
I live in Oklahoma. I always refer to it as the buckle of the Bible Belt. However, other states try and make that claim as well. Doesn't matter what state you're from. You know, if you're heavily influenced by churchianity, then you're probably going to claim that as well, which is fine. I grew up, in a religious household. Well, actually, my parents were divorced. My father much like you, very much questioning and seeking answers. Very intellectual person. He has a PhD in mass communications and a master's degree in public health. So when it comes to science, that's truth. And other things outside of science, outside of the realm of the tangible, the things that we can actually, see, hear, touch, with our five senses, that goes into the realm of speculation and faith and belief and things that, could be true, but there's no way for us to prove it. And I totally respect him for that. He instilled in me the desire for truth and an unwavering commitment to not believing for belief's sake or just to please somebody.
We are on the same team then. So let's view each other as on the same team when it comes to truth. We both value it and want to achieve it.
Here's where the other shoe drops. I said my parents were divorced. My mother, on the other hand, she and her side of the family are very religious, Southern Baptists. And so we went to church. Of course, probably half of my life I lived with my mother. The other half I lived with my father, traveling all over the country based on where the two lived at the time. So when I was living with my mother, it was very religious, you go to church, you sing all the hymns, you listen to the sermon, you're squirming in the hard wooden pews and you're uncomfortable and everything, and you just can't wait to get out of there. But it was, as far as my conversion, I guess you could call it, it was it's odd because a lot of people can't really pinpoint the time and day or the circumstances in which they were saved or made the profession of faith. They just heard a sermon, they walked down the aisle, they made a profession of faith in front of the congregation, then they got baptized that Sunday night or the following Sunday. With me, it was 1988, December. I want to say it was December 28th because it was 2 days before my birthday. We were in Del City, Oklahoma on a youth evangelism conference. And up until that time, I always had believed that I was, on the right side of the aisle, so to speak. I was saved. I was in a Christian family, went to a Christian church. I sang all the hymns. I was I was the vice president of my youth group. We had a little, club, I guess you could call it. And everything was going good for me. I even had a full set of hair. So life was good. I was a teenager. I was happy. But I went to this youth evangelism conference. And
weren't those hair days great days, though?
Absolutely. And so I went to this conference, thinking everything's fine. And I listened to the sermon. And I honestly, the point that I don't remember is exactly what the message was, because it was a evangelism conference for Christian teenagers who presumably were already in the fold. So it wouldn't be your typical evangelist type message of, Jesus died for your sins and he, rose from the grave and the typical,
How old were you here?
I was 18 years old at the time.
18.
So, I listened to this sermon and it wasn't so much, the message itself. It was the conviction that I felt that I really wasn't living as a Christian should live, and up until that point in time, I was living in a Christian household. I mean, I wasn't drinking alcohol, smoking, or doing any of the worldly bad stuff that, the typical teenager would be doing. So what sins did I have to repent of, right? But I felt at that time, at that moment, that it wasn't about what I wasn't, doing as far as living carnally and living, for myself. It was my whole presumption of, well, I'm saved because I'm in a Christian family, because I said a prayer when I was 6 years old.
Well, let's back up a little bit. And now I'm getting an echo. Can you turn your volume down?
You bet.
Let's see if that works. But you're okay with with me asking you questions that will critically examine what you believe and why you believe it?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So let me ask you then, why did you even believe in sin? Why did you even believe there was a God in the first place?
Because of my family, my
Okay.
mother, my grandmother. It was passed down from one family member to another because my uncle was a pastor. His kids, are now in the ministry. My brother was heavily influenced, in the ministry and,
So would
and
you say
preaching
you
and things like
were
that.
indoctrinated?
Yes, absolutely.
Now, at age 18, did you ever stop and ask yourself, maybe what my parents and family were teaching might not be true?
I hadn't come to that point yet. No, it everything was good. When why rock the boat? Why question when you seem to have all the answers? And at that time, every question that I might have brought up as just kind of well, how would you respond to this? Hey, I'm interested in witnessing to a friend of mine. How would I go about doing that? There's a program called CWT, which is continuing witness training, which basically trained youth or adults on how to witness to other people and share the gospel and share your faith with others, because the end result is you want conversions.
So, at what age do you think you were when you asked that question? That maybe is what I'm believing true?
At what age? I would probably say I'm a late bloomer, probably age 40.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you give away your age? How old are you now?
So,
You're 47. Hey, we're pretty much the same age. So at age 40, you asked that question, and
yeah. And the reason why here's the kicker. The reason why is up until that point, I had been so focused on soul winning and being a soldier for Christ and being so adamant about I know I'm right, and I'm looking at other faiths, Mormonism, Jehovah's Witnesses, Moonies, any kind of cultic, what we call the cults, and I was witnessing to these people, and it occurred to me that I'm not applying the same rules to my own faith. And
yes.
once I started applying the same rules to my own faith, that's when it was like, uh-oh, well, where do I go from here?
Okay, yeah, that's exactly what happened to me. I started viewing myself in the third person. How are other people viewing me? The questions I ask and the assumptions I make of others, put it back on myself. So how did you at age 40 get through that? How did you end up arriving to the conclusion, what I believe is true?
Well, the interesting thing is it was in a matter of once again learning about a new group, cult, I guess you could call it. And I really hate using the word cult anymore just because it has so much baggage attached to it. It was, on Facebook, I started, sharing my beliefs and my Southern Baptist background, my beliefs of my humble knowledge of the Bible with people that were claiming to be, I don't know if you're familiar with the Hebrew Roots movement or not, but these were people who were basically Christians, but they were following Old Testament principles, the 613 Mosaic laws.
Oh, yeah. Oh, there's
And
another term for them. I forget what it's called. But anyhow, go ahead.
sure. And so here I am. I'm trying to witness to them, but then at the same time, I'm listening to what they have to say, and some of their arguments were quite compelling. And I told myself, wait a second, this can't be true. You're nothing more than Judaizers who are trying to get Christians to leave the gospel of grace and embrace works. But then they started bringing up the fact that as a Christian, James talks about how faith without works is dead. And, I would come along and I would say, yeah, but he's not talking about saving faith. He's talking about, this empty faith of, hey, be blessed and, go with God.
But I want to go, I'm more interested, I want to go even deeper to the roots here. did you ask yourself the question, is any of the Bible, are the core propositions of the Old Testament, New Testament, whatever, is it true? And how did you come to that conclusion that it's true?
Well, I wish we had more time to really go into deep detail. Otherwise, we'd be here all night. But let's just say that in my studies of Judaism and how they approach the Bible, I've embraced a lot of that in the sense of the Bible has, in the way you view Scripture, has three layers. There's the surface layer. It's the type of stories you would tell children, fairy tales. And then there's a deeper layer, that kind of maybe, delves a little bit deeper into, what's the actual meaning behind the words. And then there's the deepest layer, which is more metaphorical. So let's take Adam and Eve, for example. On a very surface level, I can say that story is true in the same way that I can say that any fictional movie that we watch is true, because there's real people involved in the acting. They're portraying what the author's intent was to, for that character, whether it be Harry Potter, or Marvel's universe with, Thor and Captain America, whatever. And, as an audience, we're entertained by these fictional characters, but we know that they're fictional. What we don't know when it comes to the Bible is that when it talks about Genesis and about the origins of man, we really don't know how much of that is fiction or just a way that the author wanted to convey where they came from to their children. That's how I view it. I view it as a family story.
Do you view that?
A father.
Do you view right now, you can turn me up a little bit if you're having trouble hearing me,
Sure.
And I'll let you know if I hear the echo again.
Sure.
But right now, at this point in your life, do you view as the Bible as maybe some things in it are true and some things are false, or do you view it as
Absolutely.
all? Okay.
I absolutely think that the Bible contains truth and fiction. And when I say, I don't mean false as in it's a lie, because I don't think a lot of these stories are presented to us. If you're reading it from the biblical perspective, I don't think they're being presented to us as this actually happened. I think what's happening is that with the Bible comes a lot of baggage, and people are saying, well, look at the story of Jonah. I think you brought that up once. Do you believe that a man was literally swallowed by a great fish? I've seen the Jack Chick tracks, and I've seen the apologetics behind it, where they say, it's technically possible for a man to be swallowed up by, whole by a fish, because you've never seen, fish this big before. They could be prehistoric for all we know. I don't know. So I'm taking the story at face value, and then I'm looking at it from that very shallow view, and then I go one level deeper, and I say, what's the message behind it? What am I supposed to learn from this?
Okay, let's go even deeper yet, though, for a second here, and we'll figure out if we want to go in that direction or not. But are you certain that there's a God out there?
Just from my own, if you want to call it deductive reasoning, I asked you a question in the comment section, and you said that was an entirely different subject. But the question goes back to the origin of everything, the Big Bang Theory, whatever you want to call it. There's a law that basically says that matter and energy cannot be created and it cannot be destroyed. So my question is, where did the Big Bang come from? It certainly didn't just pop into existence. Something had to have caused it. There's always a cause and an effect.
I can appreciate that. And so what I'm hearing you say is you do believe in a God because of the prime mover argument, the first cause argument. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Okay. So let's just put that on a shelf for now.
Let's pin it.
Yes, let's put a pin in it. But let me ask you, how did you go from, okay, it makes sense to me, in quotes, that there's a God because of the first law of thermodynamics. How did you go from there to being a Christian and that Jesus rose from the dead? Like, you mentioned myths and so forth, some fictions in the Bible. Are you certain that a man named Jesus lived 2,000 years ago, died, and rose on the third day for your sins?
Well, I think this is where we're going to get into semantics, and I apologize in advance for this.
Okay.
I don't believe there was a man named Jesus. I do believe that there was a man named Joshua in English. In Hebrew, it would be Yehoshua or Yeshua. Okay, and that name, if you were to actually translate it from Hebrew into English, his name would be Joshua. Where we got Jesus from is Yeshua was translated from Hebrew into Greek, and his name was Jesus. From Greek, it was then translated into Latin. In Latin, it was Jesus. Okay. Eventually, over time, I think it was around the 16th or early 17th century, the letter J was invented. The I, took on that little tail at the end.
But for me, like, I don't care if his name was Myron.
Well, it's very important because
do you believe that that your synth?
Would you take the name Jesus and tell me exactly what it means in Hebrew? You can't, because it means nothing in Hebrew. But if you know Hebrew culture, every single name has a meaning behind it. Otherwise, what would be the point of God changing Jacob's name?
Let me ask you this question. Do you consider yourself a Christian?
Absolutely.
Now, okay. Now, most Christians say that, and you correct me if you think this is wrong or if you don't agree with it, but most Christians say that, number one, there's a God. Number two, he sent his son to die on the cross because man is sinful and there's a sin problem. And there was an atonement needed. So this man, who is also God in flesh, was the perfect sacrifice for you, Chris, and me and whoever else, died and rose the third day. Do you believe all that?
Not the way you described it, no.
Interesting.
And here's why. Because if you've probably heard the phrase, the greatest love story, is contained in the Bible. It's about how God loved man so much, John 3:16, that he gave his only begotten son. That's not the greatest love story. The greatest love story is that God, and this is going to blow people's minds because they never think about it from a Hebrew or Israelite perspective. They always think of it from a Protestant, Christian, or Catholic perspective, which is light years away from the origin of where it came from. The ultimate love story was the fact that God loved Abraham, and he loved his entire family, all the way up to Israel, the nation of Israel. We had the 12 tribes, right? Well, if you read through the Old Testament and you study how Israel, sinned against God, okay, and I haven't even told you what sin is yet, but they've sinned against God, and they break apart into the 10 tribes of Israel and the 2 other tribes of Israel. I believe it was Judah and Benjamin, and how because of this, God gave them a writ of divorce and divorced them basically. Okay. That's kind of what people see on the outward appearance, right? And well, God just put away the Jews is what they call it, but they're totally ignoring the other 10 tribes of Israel, which there's so many people worldwide who are part of that 10 tribes of Israel. They don't even know their heritage. Okay, they are actually part of Israel. They don't even know it. Okay, all they think of is when they think of Israel, they think of the Jews, and that's it. But what about the other 10 tribes? Where are they?
Well, I got a very just simple question. Do you believe there was a guy who was dead for 3 days and rose again?
I think there was. I think that the resurrection is pivotal. I mean, it's a it's the pin. You pull that pin out, everything falls apart when it comes to Christianity.
Okay.
If Jesus didn't rise from the dead, Christianity is false.
Okay. So, and since you're a Christian, you think it's true?
It has to be. It has to be true. If it's not, then how many billions of people claim to be Christian, whether they're Protestant or Catholic or Orthodox? Can you imagine the devastation if all of those people suddenly came to the realization that what they've been believing for their entire life, for generations and for 2 millennia, is a lie?
Well, I mean, that's still
not a Holocaust. I mean, not a Holocaust. Sorry, talk about a Revelation type scenario where you've got the end of the world as you know it.
But you're not saying that's a good reason that it has to be true, are you?
Reason, no. But it's a side effect of why certain things can be true. Okay, let's go back to this. What I was saying about how names are important. And I said,
I'm actually not. I'm actually not interested in that. Interested in the grassroots base level. You've told me that you believe in a God for first cause reasons.
Sure.
You told me you believe a man died and rose again. So my next question is then, how did you link this prime mover God to the God of the Bible? How did you come to the conclusion that the God who created the universe was that God in the Old Testament? How did you arrive at that conclusion?
Because I haven't found a better answer. I've studied other religions. I mentioned just the Christian aspects of it. Mormonism, Jehovah's Witness, or whatever. But I've also studied philosophy as well as Hinduism, as well as Taoism. Confucianism. I've looked at them, and for the most part, like Buddhism is more of a philosophy than an actual religion, and it's got some good points to it. But they never really answer the ultimate question of where did it all begin? Who started it all? Idea.
How did you? How did you?
Is just makes no sense whatsoever.
But how did you come to the conclusion that it would have to be one of the religions on the planet, and maybe all of them are wrong?
Okay, so let's just say, for instance, that all religions are wrong. Okay, then what we have here is a grand conspiracy, and I'm not really much into conspiracy theories. Okay, according to the Old Testament records, God appeared to certain individuals, and it was a personal revelation. But then you could say the same thing for Mormonism with Joseph Smith. Oh, he had a personal revelation with God, right? And so what's the difference? The difference is, and again, I'm not anti-Semitic, so I'm not going to go and accuse the Jews of lying, and I hope you're not either. But according to them, okay, according to not only Judaism, but their ancient texts, God revealed himself to the entire nation, not just one individual, Moses or Abraham. He actually, when Moses, and again, I understand some people will say, yeah, but the story of Moses is more than likely, a fictitious story because we don't have any proof that, the Jews were slaves in Egypt. I don't want to get into that at the moment. But what I will say is that if we take the story at face value, and we assume that the story has some historical context in which, they left Egypt and they were led by a leader named Moses, and that God did reveal himself to an entire nation, then I think that's pretty strong evidence that some supernatural being does exist, and throughout the Bible, he reveals himself little by little, kind of line upon line, precept upon precept, and he's here, he's revealing himself in ways that make sense to us. And I'm sure you've heard the analogy of the human and the ant. How can an ant fully conceptualize and understand, what your day is like as a human? Well, an ant can't. And so when we're comparing, an ant to a human, it's the same type of comparison between a human and God.
Okay, I want to repeat back what you've said so far. I like to keep things like concise and short and to the point.
And I be a little long-winded, so I apologize.
I'm hearing you say that. Well, okay, Doug, I hear what you're saying. There's a God out there, but how did I link it to the God of the Bible, or more specifically the Old Testament? And you said, well, it's kind of inconceivable to me that the Jewish nation would make all this up. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
I believe that that if an entire nation, again, it's a personal choice for me. I'm gonna be completely honest with you. There's no evidence out there that says God exists that I can point to and say, this is it right here. You cannot refute this. I can't do that. And I'm going to be upfront and honest with you and tell you that. For me, it really is a personal revelation, a personal choice that says to me, it all makes sense when there is a divine being, a creator.
I really appreciate that. Take
that away, and nothing makes sense. Morality doesn't make sense. Laws don't make sense. Anarchy makes perfect sense, because it's all about me.
But
And
now we're getting into a lot of different topics, but I
you know what
want
I'm saying?
to, yeah, I
You
know what
gotta
you're
have
saying, and I appreciate what you said there.
faith.
I heard you say that there's no evidence that God exists, and it's more of a personal choice.
Sure.
But let me ask you this: do you think it's a good practice to actively believe things where there's no evidence?
Well,
Actively believe.
I
You can.
think I think that there are ideas out there, quantum mechanics, things that science is on the cusp of discovering that people believe, like black holes, and they're really the evidence is so. You can have evidence for just about anything. You can have manufactured evidence if you wanted to. Okay, I mean, we've got people out on the internet who still believe the Earth is flat.
I've
Okay,
talked to a
and
couple of them.
they create so much evidence to support their belief that the Earth is flat. Okay, and they nitpick to, you know,
I agree.
how they nitpick all of the evidence that we would present to them from NASA, from videos showing them the curvature of the Earth, or space, flight in space. They say, oh well, the moon landing was a complete hoax. I wasn't there. I don't know, but everything that I've learned up, for 47 years tells me that when I look up in the sky, the moon's really there, and when I travel halfway around the world, I'm not just going from point A to point B on a horizontal line. I'm actually traveling around.
Yeah,
the
I don't
Earth.
want to get into the flat Earth on this discussion,
But I'm in agreement with you on that topic. But yet my point remains that there are people that believe that, and they can produce evidence to
right.
support their belief. So I'm not really the kind of person that says, you know what, evidence is what's going to convince you that I'm right and you're wrong. I don't want to do that. That's a waste of time, in my opinion. I will share my faith, and if a person hears something that clicks with them and connects with them, great. If they hear something I say and they think, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard, keep your opinions to yourself. I'm going to say, God bless you, have a great day, and shalom.
But we're on the same team here when it comes to truth, and I just want to have you think about this. Imagine a country, a tribe that's pretty isolated. They share a belief. They write a book. But I'm not talking about the Jews. I'm talking about a different tribe. Let's say it's a tribe in Asia somewhere.
It could be in South America.
And they have a concept of a deity, and that they write about. And you and I, we find these writings, and we look at them and say, wow, this is pretty amazing writings. They're very detailed, and there's some verifiable historical writings that we say this is pretty good evidence. But would you agree with me that doesn't necessarily mean that their deity is real and true and exists?
I would agree with you, yes.
Okay.
And I don't have anything against atheists or agnostics. I think I have a little more respect for the agnostic, just because they're at least still open to the possibility that there's something out there that we haven't quite.
And I am open to the possibility that there's a deity out there. I truly am. I kind of hope there's a personal God out there that can do miracles. That'd be amazing. I would love to see that. But the point I was getting at is, when I asked you earlier, how did you connect the dots between the prime mover and the God of the Old Testament? And you mentioned the tribe of Israel, or the 12 tribes, and couldn't it be possible that maybe some of that is true and historical, and it was a record of a certain tribe's events in the past, but the base proposition that Yahweh is true and exists, that maybe is not true? Would you agree with that?
I would say that the Creator, rather than give him a label and call him Yahweh or Jehovah or whatever, the prime mover, the Creator, the one that started it all, he or she, we're using personal pronouns here. I don't know the non-gender term, but this being, for whatever reason, wanted to create life. And I think the reason for that is because within the very nature of this divine being, life is just part of its nature. The New Testament says God is love. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. I look at it in terms of, if there were some extraterrestrial being out there, since most people that reject religion, embrace some form of extraterrestrial possibility. If there were some extraterrestrial being out there that had this nature where it just had to create life, kind of like us humans, we just got to have sex. Otherwise, we wouldn't have how many billions of people, 9, 10 billion people? I don't know. Is it 8 billion? I really don't know the
Chris,
number.
my question, Chris,
you understand that we have this desire to create life, and it comes from somewhere. And so if I go back far enough, it's got to originate from a being that has to create life. And we are the result of that
right.
inexplicable urge to create life.
I'm sticking on the specific theism right now. My question was, isn't it possible that some things in the Old Testament are true, like some of the historical facts of what happened to the tribe of Israel could be true, but the core proposition that the deity that they worshipped may not be true? Would you agree with that?
I don't see how that would be possible unless there was a grand conspiracy to invent something that doesn't
Do you think
exist.
it's possible in other religions for tribes to have written documents and that some of those things in those documents are true?
I haven't seen any evidence to suggest that other tribes, most tribes, like I mentioned, South America, didn't even have a writing system. Everything they did was verbal. Okay.
Okay. You're saying that the Old Testament.
So I'd have to actually see it.
So you're saying that the core propositions of the Old Testament have to be true?
Well, tell me what you believe the core propositions are. I don't want to agree to something I don't know what you define your term.
That the God of Israel exists. That's one of them.
That the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob actually exists. Yes, yeah. I think that core proposition is true.
Now, and my question is, why do you think that's true?
Why would I think that's true? I would have to really think on that. And I think that the best answer I can come up with at this point in time is because I don't have any reason to doubt that it's not true. Like I said, I've looked at other religions and I've given them the benefit of the doubt, and they don't have that air of authenticity that I see when I read the Old Testament. There are things in the Old Testament that just ring true to me. Just like, when you read something, when you read a book of fiction versus a book of nonfiction, you can read it and just tell something rings true here.
Do you agree?
And then other times,
would you agree with me?
Like, jive with it. I don't understand. This doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. That's, sometimes we have what makes sense to us. It just rings true. But there's many people that, even take Mormons, it rings true what Joseph Smith said. Right. So something ringing true or making sense is not necessarily a good indicator of truth.
That's the initial catalyst that should drive you to research more.
Yes, I agree. So you can ponder that one for next time, of why you think the core proposition that the God of Israel actually exists is true. You can get back to me on that one. But let's go even deeper or further back and talk about the prime mover, because this, I think you mentioned it in the YouTube comment section, and I think this is really important to you, and it's important to a lot of people. Oh, remember you told me that I misunderstood you, and I thought you said I couldn't take criticism on my YouTube comments section.
And I was saying I felt like you could.
Right. But
I was affirming you, not being
right.
negative.
But I heard you typed that, I really don't know. But based on the evidence from how you interact on your YouTube comments, Doug, it seems like you can take criticism. And I really appreciated you saying that. But the part that I appreciated the most of what you said was, I really don't know.
Right.
But then you gave a guess. Now,
Sure.
when it comes to the prime mover, are you saying that you really don't know, but your guess is the prime mover does exist?
Based on my personal experiences, my evidence that I've researched myself, all of the evidence that I have leads me to believe that there is a prime mover. Okay. I don't know that for a fact because the prime mover hasn't revealed himself to me in a revelation like he did to the Apostle John, or through a physical manifestation of a man named Jesus. But everything that I've read up until this point where we're having this conversation leads me to believe that having a prime mover as the origin of species, as the origin of the universe, makes a heck of a lot more sense than that we just popped into existence helter-skelter, just for no reason at all.
Okay. Yeah. Again, like that whole phrase, it makes sense. When it comes to cosmology, I think that is the one area where most human beings on this planet are, like what you mentioned earlier, like ants trying to understand something.
Absolutely.
That is.
And I love to listen to scientists on YouTube that actually talk about their work, and they're so far over my head. It humbles me.
Which is your
And
favorite scientist who talk about this?
I'm going to embarrass myself now because I don't recall his name. It's on the tip of my tongue. I want to say I'm.
That's right.
Yeah.
Here's one of my favorites is Sean Carroll.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why I bring up Sean Carroll is because you made the comment in the YouTube comment section that, matter cannot be created or destroyed, which
Right.
is the first law of thermodynamics. And therefore, where did the matter come from if it can't be created? So that therefore God. But Sean Carroll is a guy who says that the universe could very well be eternal. And he says that there's nothing in quantum mechanics that says that it can't be, that it could very well be eternal.
It could be. You asked me about the scientist, and I cheated a little bit. I had to look him up here.
That's right.
So his name is Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Oh, yes. I have a friend who's had dinner with him.
Now I'm jealous because I think the guy is a genius. But when it comes to cosmology and the universe being infinite, I think to myself, well, whatever happened to the expanding universe idea? If the universe expands and contracts, and this is a whole other topic, so I don't want to get off into the weeds.
But if
it doesn't make sense that it's infinite, unless we're talking about God, because once again, God is infinite. So who's to say that what we're calling this universe is not actually just another name for God? And all we're seeing is just the tangible, scientific, what we can see with our five senses. And I know there's actually more senses than five, scientifically speaking, but for what most people accept, five senses: touch, taste, smell, sight, hearing, scientifically, that's all we've got.
Okay.
And then you've got the theoretical science, which is incredibly interesting.
Let's stay focused on the main reason why you believe in a prime mover, and that is because something can't be created unless a God does it. Once
again, you said. Let me get your perspective because I want to have a point of reference here.
Sure.
When it comes to the Big Bang Theory, is that a legitimate theory, or is that something I've been misinterpreting?
It is a theory that has a ton of evidence for, yes.
Okay, so who's to say that the catalyst or what caused that Big Bang was not God?
I agree with you. It could have been a deity who did it, but that says nothing about what that deity is like, where he came from.
The problem with God is the personal God that is revealed in the pages of the Bible because of all of the choices, all of the actions that we see taking place in the Bible that we today would consider immoral.
Chris,
such a
Chris, let's stay focused. Chris, I really want to stay focused on this because we already talked about the Bible, and I asked you how did you link the two, and you said, well, really, I don't know, and you can get back to me on that later. But let's stay focused on this deity as being the prime mover, because there has to be one, because matter can't create matter. Like, where did the matter come from to cause the Big Bang? That's what you're getting at, correct?
right.
So,
And I understand.
So let's say
know
you and I are best friends, and we both value truth, and we're talking now and I'm asking you the question, but what if, Chris, that there was matter before the Big Bang that caused the Big Bang, and that matter is eternal? Would we need a God then?
I would say that you're basing that statement on faith. You're making a faith statement there.
Okay, yeah, I would. It's a what?
Reversed. I'm now in your seat asking
No,
you.
I'm asking you a what if question.
Well, that's my point. Is we don't know.
We don't know.
We don't know.
We don't know.
We're making hypotheses. We're guessing. We're saying, you know what, this makes sense.
Okay, Chris, I love that. I love that. Your answer was, we don't know what happened before the Big Bang or what caused it. We don't know. So why, let me ask you this, do you say that you do know a God did it then?
My conviction is that there was a divine creator, and, that may not be satisfactory to you or to your audience members who are, skeptics. And I totally respect that.
We don't care about the audience members. We don't care. It's just you and me, and we're on the same team. We're trying to figure out what's true. We want to believe true things. And
well, okay, so we're talking about what's true. Let's take God out of the equation completely, okay? What is your definition of truth?
Truth is all those things learned by reliable methods that hopefully reflect reality. That's how.
So you're talking about objective truth, something that we can. It's going to be 2 + 2 = 4.
I don't think there's such thing as truth in the singular sense. I think there's truths in the plural sense. There's many types of truths.
If in order for them to be true, must they be objective and you be able to actually prove that it's true?
No, I say that I don't need 100% certainty to say something is true or that I know something. I think there's many times.
Objective truth.
I believe there's objective truth, subjective truth, absolute truth. There's many different types of truth out there.
Let me give you an example. There's a car wreck. Okay, you're a witness and you're on the north side of the street. I'm a witness. I'm on the south side of the street. Okay, we have two different perspectives, two different truths. But the objective truth is there was a car accident. There's no disputing it. It's right there in front of us.
Okay.
But your subjective truth is colored by your perception of what you saw. Maybe you didn't actually see the wreck. Maybe you only heard it.
Correct.
Okay. Maybe you only smelt the burning rubber of the tires and the atmosphere around it. Versus my truth, which is I actually saw it, but I'm deaf, so I couldn't hear anything.
Correct.
So your subjective truth, there's nothing wrong with it, but it doesn't change the objective truth, which is that there was a car accident.
I agree.
And for me, when it comes to subjective truth always falls under objective truth. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think sometimes they're kind of like side by side, not a subset of the other. But let me put this way. When you asked me what is truth, and I said it's all of those things learned by reliable methods, that is now talking about you and me looking at the same car accident. And now the question is, if you and I are the only pieces of evidence for this car crash, is this now reliable? And I would say maybe not. And so I think it's okay to be agnostic and say what you said earlier, I don't know.
Right.
Exactly what happened.
You can only explain what you witnessed.
But here's where, Chris, I have a problem sometimes with people who say, I do know, Doug. I do know about what happened before the Big Bang or how the universe was created. I do know.
how do you know? I mean, were you there?
And
Did you witness it?
so I appreciate people who say, well, I believe this is what
I,
happened, but I don't know.
right.
So when I asked you earlier, and I'm not quite sure, I don't think you answered me. Do you know that there's a God who's the prime mover, or do you just believe it and you're not really confident about it? How would you phrase it?
No, I know. I'm going to fall into that trap. I believe with very strong conviction that there is a prime mover. Okay. Do I know it for a fact that I can prove it, with a written thesis and with all the logical arguments that man can muster? Absolutely not. I'm not that smart. And I'd probably bore you if I did try and do that. All I can tell you is that my faith, my hope, my, just the fact that, what really motivates me to get up in the morning and do a good job and be good to people and everything like that is the fact that God started it all, and if it weren't for God, I wouldn't be here. My parents wouldn't be here, all the way to the very first people. Now, I'm not even interested in whether or not the story in Genesis about how he formed man from the dust of the earth is true or not. That's irrelevant to me. Whether he did it through evolution or whether he did it in some other means that we haven't quite discovered yet, I still believe he did it. He's the spark. He's the origin.
Okay, I really appreciate that you're saying that you don't know that there's a prime mover for certain, but you believe it there is because, and then you listed things like, and I'll summarize, paraphrase, meaning, purpose in life. Sure. But I can't help but think of other people who you and I would say they believe crazy things. I can't understand how they can believe that, but they would say, "Oh, I believe it because it gives me meaning and purpose." And so is just the fact that something gives you comfort, that something gives you meaning, that something that gives you purpose, reflect reality of it being objectively true? Do you understand what I'm asking?
Does it give it reality that it's objectively true? The only things that I can say are objectively true are those, and even that's not objectively true. We can go out there and we can, and this is going to get into philosophy, which I'm not well studied in, and I wish I was, but you can go out there and you can see a tree, you can walk up to the tree, you can touch it, and you can say this is objectively true, but the things that are happening now with virtual reality, to where, all of these things like pain, sensors in your hand, are all controlled by the brain. Well, how do I even know I have a brain?
Well,
I haven't seen it. So objectively, can I really say I've got a brain in my head? And I know a lot of your people here are going to be laughing and saying he absolutely does not have a brain.
But do you see the point I'm making? Like let's say I told you.
Can you have objective truth without physically actually being able to see it? You have a brain inside your skull, but how do you know you do?
Chris, let me rephrase my question, because I don't think you quite understood what I was getting at. And forgive me, I'm going to use a very extreme example that a lot of Christians are going to hate me for using, but I believe in pixies. And I can't prove to you that they're real, but they help me get up in the morning. I find meaning and purpose in life because of my belief in pixies. Now,
you could say the same about angels if you wanted. I mean, sure.
But would you say that is a good reason to believe in pixies?
No, it's not. No,
so why
absolutely.
is it a good reason to believe in the prime mover? Because you said it gave you comfort, it gave you meaning, it gave you purpose. But you don't know that it's true, but you believe it is. Why does it work for you and not the person who believes in pixies?
Well, I'm not going to say that it doesn't work for the person that believes in pixies, even though
But
from
you
my
said it wasn't a good reason to believe in pixies. Why is it a good reason for you to believe in the prime mover?
well, okay, well, let's be completely honest here. Maybe it's not a good reason, okay? But the point is that it's part of who I am. You know, it's ingrained within my very being. You know, I think a person, and a lot of what people believe really come from how they were brought up and raised, I think. You know,
Yeah.
and at some point, you know, people are, you know, are either going to embrace it and it's going to become a part of them, or they're going to reject it and they're going to find something else that's going to become a part of them. Okay, so whether it be atheism or agnosticism or some deism, okay, at some point in each and every one of our lives, we're going to come to a crossroads and we're going to say, you know, is there any reason for me to believe X, Y, or Z? No, I don't believe X. What about Y? No. Z, that makes the most sense to me. I'm going to believe that. And if that happens to be atheism, agnosticism, or deism, it's going to be one of those. And I understand that from an atheist perspective, you could say, oh, it's pure logic. I'm absolutely Captain Mr. Thinker here. And, you know, I have got no problem with, you know, with science, and everything just lines up in order. And I don't need any kind of deity to explain anything. Okay. To me, that's a little bit above my pay grade. I don't think I'm going to be at that point where I can tell people, you know what, I've got God and I don't need anything else, and be Mr. Haughty and just, you know, offensive to people because I'm right and you're wrong. That's not who I am. You know, for me, believing in God, believing what the Bible says about God, is just a matter of, you know, that's what I was exposed to. That's what I had studied for 40 years of my life, you know, and I say 40 because I don't think I was actually reading the Bible before age 7. But my point is, being raised in a Christian environment, I don't think I would be a Muslim today having been raised in a Christian environment, you know, unless it was a very bad experience within Christianity. And I think that's what happens to people when they change religions, is they have such a horrible experience with one religion that they might go to the extreme and pick a different religion, or no religion at all, based on previous behavior and experiences that they've had. I think it's all about experience.
I'm getting an echo again. If you want to turn your volume down. I heard you mention some stereotypes about atheists. Keep turning it down.
That's for a specific purpose that I made those stereotypes, because atheists and agnostics make stereotypes of Christians every single day.
Yes, and what I want to say is, let's just put all that aside for now. And again, you and I, we're good friends. We're talking about how we approach truth. How do we get as close as we can to truth? And we talked about the specific theism, namely the Old Testament, and how we link the prime mover to the tribe of Israel, and you'll get back to me on that one. And then we talked about the prime mover, and I think you and I are in the same boat. We would say, I don't know what happened before the Big Bang. I personally do not actively believe there is a prime mover. You do. And I'm hearing you say that one of the reasons you do is because how you were raised, and it gives you comfort and gives you purpose and gives you meaning. But at the same time, you admitted to me that people who believe in things that you deem to be false, like pixies, that's not a good reason. So maybe it's not a good reason for you. So where are we left here with? I just want to give you my take on this whole thing, that I come from the point of view, I do call myself an atheist, but what I mean by that is I just don't live my life like it's true. I still have meaning. I still have purpose. I still love to get up in the morning and do things. I still value things like honesty and truth. And I still love my family. I still find joy in the same things you find joy in. And so, but I'm just okay. I'm totally okay, Chris, with saying I don't know to these big questions. And maybe someday I will know to such a high, when I say no, I mean to a high degree of confidence that I actively believe it. But I'm not there. And I suspect that specific theism, I've done enough research and so forth that it would be really tough for me to believe in a specific theism here on this planet that's currently out there. But that being said, I'm totally open to this whole idea of a supernatural, whatever that means, deity out there. So I just wanted to let you know that that's where I'm coming from. And I also want you to know that I understand why so many people do derive purpose and meaning and comfort from this belief. And I get it. A lot of it has to do with community as well. And that's one thing I think a lot of non-believers are really lacking in, is that sense of community. And it's hurting them, I think. But I'll give you the last word, and we've been almost going for an hour, so...
Well, I got to, I've had time to think while I was listening to you, while I was discussing with you as to, and again, it may not be a valid reason, but, I go back to, the fact that the entire nation of Israel, had this experience with God. They were, and it was recorded. Unless it was a grand conspiracy, and there's some whoppers out there. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I read the the textual evidence, for what they recorded, and I look at it, and I look at how they record the good, not just the good, the bad, the ugly. I mean, all of it. And yet, the common theme throughout the entire Old Testament and New Testament is that the center of it all is God. And I think to myself, if there were no God, then what's the point? I mean, this is not just your average everyday tribal God that you pray to for rain. This is the God that created the entire universe. And I just think to myself, how could it be possible for an entire nation to try and trick the world into believing in a divine being? I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me, because Jewish people, they don't even go out and proselytize and try and make converts. I mean, they'll actually, basically tell you, you know what, you really wouldn't want to be a Jew. It's just, you're not cut out for it. And I have a lot of respect for them because, they have their beliefs. And they make no apology. You can be Jewish and be an atheist. Hey,
Chris, I promised you the last word, so I'm going to keep that promise. But I'm just going to ask this favor of you. What you just said about you're not a conspiracy theorist and that this, what they wrote down has to be true, otherwise it's a conspiracy. I didn't.
Actual stories in them were actually true, as in Adam and Eve or something like that. I'm talking about what they recorded of what they experienced with God.
Okay, now here's my favor I'm going to ask of you. Mm-hmm. I want you to take the flip side of that thought, that argument, that line of reasoning, and I want you to kind of push back against it and argue against yourself now. What's the other side of what you just said?
What, that an entire nation made up a lie and tried to convince the world that there was a divine being? I'm not quite understanding what the flip side is to.
What's another hypothesis of what happened?
Oh, okay. Well, the other hypothesis, I suppose you could say, is that it's a work of fiction and that the author created a fake nation called Israel. Created fake stories for Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and they're just characters in a fictional novel.
Do you have to go that far?
Sure, why not? If you're going to do the flip side, sure, why not?
Well, what's a softer flip side? What would a softer flip side be?
A softer flip side?
Yeah. Like that's one option. What you just said, that it's all fiction, but couldn't there be some fiction, some not?
Well, sure, and that's what I didn't think we had enough time to really go into. I think there are certain books in the Bible which are fictional. Okay, but they
No, I'm talking about the
convey.
core propositions. What if, Chris, that there was a real tribe of Israel, that's not fiction? What if they did certain things that have been described in the Old Testament? Maybe that's not fiction, but maybe the God that they worship is fiction. Could that be a possibility?
Any Jews? I'm wondering if you know any, because they I have Hebrew stock in me, and I can tell you that it's just not that simple. I mean, they're not the most, when it comes to trustworthiness, as far as trusting people and being like gullible. They're not gullible people in the sense of hey, this guy says that there's a God, let's believe him. I mean, they demand some sort of proof, some evidence. They want you to back up. They'll spend hours arguing with one another just to prove a point. I don't believe, it's got to be in the DNA somewhere. I just don't believe that it's even possible for an entire nation to just be like, you know what, we're going to believe in this God because my grandfather believed in this God and his grandfather believed in this God, all the way down to our great 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 grandfather Noah, which we don't even believe if he was real, because he was probably a fictional character. That seems a little bit cynical to me. I think it makes a lot more sense, at least to me, that that if there really were truly a divine being, and in his nature was to create life, he wouldn't just simply create life and then walk away and leave us to our own devices to make it up as we go. I think that when the Old Testament talks about how God intervened and he actually had conversations with people, I think that's what actually happened. When he actually revealed himself to an entire nation, that was in stark contrast to other religions that claim private revelation and said, "Oh, God appeared to me. I'm special. You've got to listen to what I say."
I'm gonna try one more time here. And again, I want you to have the last word, so I want to just ask the question. Then if your memory was wiped clean, so all the Jewish heritage in you is gone, and all your knowledge of the Old Testament is gone, so you got a clean slate, and then you pick up the Old Testament for the very first time and you read it, what conclusion would you come up with? Would you come up with the same conclusion you have now?
My conclusion would be I need to read it a second time, and then
okay.
A fourth time. I could not possibly, in even the remotest imagination, pick up the Bible for the first time and come to a conclusion about it. Oh my gosh, talking snakes? Are you kidding me?
But even if you spent the next 10 years as an adult, you're 47 years old. Let's say you went from age 47 to age 57, but you're starting with a clean slate at age 47. Do you think in 10 years of study you would come up to the same conclusion you have now about the God of the Old Testament existing?
Do I have access to anything other than the Bible?
Yeah.
Do I have the internet?
Yeah.
Okay, because I got to do research. I can't just read the Bible. People will criticize me for that and say, "Oh, what you're saying? You can't just read the Bible and come to the truth?" Well, no, and here's the reason why. Because the Bible wasn't written in English. It was written in Hebrew. It was written in Greek. Okay, it was written in Aramaic. It was written in different languages. And if you know anything about languages, words, there's not a one-for-one word translation for every single language out there. There's nuances.
So do you think you would come up with the same conclusion you have now?
So I guess my answer is, if I had the same resources, the answer would be yes, because everything that I've done up until this point has been a logical progression for me. Not everything. There's sometimes where, you make these leaps of faith and you're just like, well, let's see what happens, if I do this. Well, okay, I didn't get the desired result, so obviously that's not true. But I continue to, test my faith and put, my beliefs on trial, to see if they even measure up to something that could be even perceptible to somebody else and make sense to them.
Yeah, I
very good communicator. So maybe it wouldn't make sense to them because I'm such a poor communicator. I don't know.
The reason why I ask that question is because it gets to our biases. I have biases. I'm sure you would admit to having biases, and so I'm just wondering if you think that having that clean slate, where all those how you were raised and so forth, all those biases are now gone, and you just look at the text for what it is, if you think you would come up to the same conclusion you have today, and I'm hearing you saying you would. And maybe you're right, but there's many people on this planet who have done that.
I did not take into account your biases that you mentioned. I apologize. I did not take that into account. Wiping the slate clean, I've got amnesia.
Yeah.
Don't remember anything. I don't have any contact with family members or anything like that. That's a different scenario, actually, because I wouldn't have any reason to dive into the Bible like I do now, because of my previous experiences. If I had a clean slate and I was picked up and moved into a totally different environment altogether, okay, and someone dropped the Bible in my lap, I'd probably take a look at it, maybe thumb through a few pages, and then set it aside and say,
No, I'm talking about, let's say I paid you $1 million over the next 10 years. You have amnesia, you're starting from square one, but I'm paying you $1 million over the next 10 years to study the Old Testament. Do you think you would come up with the same conclusion, starting from square one? No, the previous biases of childhood and family is gone. Do you think you would still come up with the same conclusion you have today? What do you think?
Because my conclusion today is not the same conclusion I had 10 years ago. So yeah, absolutely. 10 years? Absolutely.
Absolutely, you would come up with the same conclusion, or you wouldn't?
Right, because my conclusion that I have right now, if you're talking about core principles, it would be the same, okay? But if you're talking about the differences in what I believe now versus what I believed 10 years ago, absolutely, those would be different. But the core values of what I believe about God, would stay the same.
Interesting.
But here's the thing, and I don't think your core values would change that much either, because I think within each of us, unless you're a raving lunatic, each of us have within us this idea of the golden rule: do unto others.
No, I'm not talking about core values. I'm talking about the core propositions of it being true. In other words, 10 years go by, you're starting from square one. Do you think you would arrive at the conclusion that the deity that the Israelites worshipped is actually real?
If I've got the Bible, sure. I think that with the Bible and an understanding of the Hebrew text and understanding of the Greek text, I think that knowing the culture and the circumstances in which they were in, I think it makes sense to me. I'm not going to say it makes perfect sense, because there's things in the Bible that obviously.
But remember, you had amnesia, so it no longer, what made sense to you in this aspect no longer makes sense to you, because you're
right,
ignorant.
Even though you've got amnesia, you don't change your person. That never changes. So even with amnesia, you might not know. With amnesia, total amnesia, you wouldn't even have any foundation in which to be able to say, I don't know what I don't know. You're starting from a blank slate. You're picking up this book, you're reading it, and
if I ask this question to a Muslim, starting a 47-year-old Muslim, and I asked him, all your past history about Islam is now gone. Your family, friends, you're moved in a new area. Now study the book, the Quran, for the next 10 years. Do you think
I believe that they have the same conclusion they have now, as when it comes to core values, what they believe
on the core propositions? Do you think they would believe that Allah was written by Allah, that Allah wrote the Quran?
By Gabriel. I mean, yeah. So basically, what Islam teaches is that Muhammad received the text of the Quran.
No, Chris, listen to my question. My question is, do you believe a Muslim plucked out of their environment, have their memory wiped about everything about the religion, about Islam, and then starting fresh for the next 10 years, do you think they would arrive at the same core proposition that Allah wrote the Quran through Gabriel and Muhammad?
Sure, why not? I don't see any reason why they wouldn't, because that's what the book says. I mean, if you read the book, that's what's going to come out of it if you take it at face value. Remember, there's 3 levels.
But why would they take it at face value?
Well, any text. I mean, if you give me a book, and again, slate wipe clean. You give me a book like Harry Potter, and I don't know anything about magic or fiction or anything like that, and I read this book, I'm going to think, wow, what magical place is this? I'd love to go there. The slate has been wiped clean. You haven't given me anything to use presuppositionally. Did our time run out?
Yeah, I think we'll end it there. I really encourage you to watch this back.
Okay.
And
I'm sure I'm going to embarrass myself, but
and I think, and then I'm curious to know your thoughts after you watch this back, especially what we.
You seem almost incredulous at my proposition that if I had my mind wiped basically and I read the Bible, I'd come to the same conclusion. Can I ask you, off air, obviously here, why is that? Why does it seem so incredible?
I'm still on air, by the way. I think that someone whose past has been, in regards to one specific area, religion, if that's been wiped clean and they're starting from scratch, and I could be wrong about this,
Okay.
I think whether you're a Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, Jew, Christian, I highly doubt they would come to the same conclusion.
And why is that?
Starting from scratch, because what makes sense to them in a lot of cases have been shaped by how they were raised.
Sure.
Okay. Now,
That's not a good wipe to clean.
And what makes sense to them has to do with the culture that they're in. And I'm saying,
but they're still in the same culture.
No, I'm saying you remove them from the culture, you remove them from their whole religious bias experience, including with their knowledge of texts and so forth.
Okay.
I highly doubt that people would arrive at the same conclusion, starting fresh as an adult. Now, and again, I could be wrong, but my intuition, my gut reaction is that things would change.
Okay. So is that objectively true?
I'm not making a claim. I'm saying this is my guess.
Okay. So, but what's the common denominator between all these different religions? It's the text, right? Because you said if you wiped the slate clean for me and only gave me the Bible, would I come to the same conclusion?
But Chris.
So my question is the only common denominator between all these different religions their specific religious text?
No, a lot of religions do have a specific deity. That's true, but not all.
Right. But what I'm saying is you're taking them out of their environment, wiping the slate clean. So you want to know, will they come to the same conclusion? My question is, what influence will they have? Is it only their religious text?
Yeah.
Because if their religious text, then that's the only road they have to go down.
Right. But why would you take it at face value?
Well, a lot of religions don't, but I'm just merely mentioning to you the three interpretive ways of interpreting the Bible. I don't know if this three ways matters to other religious texts, but I know from my own research that if I read a text, I always take it at face value, number one, but I don't stop there. I go one level deeper, and I say, what's the moral of the story? What are they trying to teach me here? And then I go one more level deeper, and I say, well, are these types, these characters, are they really there, or do they represent something else? And that way you get deeper and deeper into the text until you can come to
Is the God of Israel really there, or does he represent something else, Chris?
Well, if I were to go into a third level, a very deeper meaning of the text, I could honestly say that there really is no God, okay, that God doesn't actually exist, but that through trial and error, and there's a lot of trial and error in the Old Testament, they finally arrived at this idea of, hey, maybe we should be good to each other and not kill each other. I mean, that seems to us like common sense, but we're talking, a 4,000-year-old ancient primitive man here who had to kind of figure this stuff out on their own. So which is, for a typical person, which is easier to believe, that a child figured it out all by themselves through trial and error, or that the child had a teacher? So the 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 comparison there is Israel was the child. Does it make sense that they just figured it out as they moved along through life? Or does it make sense that they had a teacher and that teacher was God?
Do you take it at face value that Allah spoke to Gabriel to Muhammad?
When I read the text, I take it at face value.
So do you?
Now, does that mean I believe it? No, of course not.
Why don't you believe it?
Because of the internal contradictions that I read when I read the Quran.
Ah, okay. And this is a new topic. So, but I want to stop here. You don't believe the Quran is the perfect will of Allah because of the internal contradictions. If there were internal contradictions with the Bible, you would say what? You would stop believing it?
Would I stop believing the entire Bible? Well, here's the difference between the Quran and the Bible. The Bible is a collection of books. So it's not just one book. The Quran is not just a collection of books. It claims to be one book.
If there was a contradiction in the Bible, would you stop believing it as God's word?
I would say that when it comes to contradictions, I think that what most people call a contradiction is really more or less a misunderstanding, that they don't quite understand the text itself. I don't really think the contradictions
Maybe you don't really understand the text of the Quran.
And that's a valid point. Maybe I don't, because according to a Muslim, you can't really understand the Quran unless you read it in the original Arabic.
Yeah, they say that.
I don't read Arabic, sorry. So the Muslims got me on that one. God bless them. Hey, as long as they're leading a peaceful life and they follow their religion as they claim it is, a religion of peace, I say God bless them. Let them live their life.
And that's a great segue. Next week, same time, same bat channel. I'm having a guest on who is a peace-loving Muslim. His first name is Raza, I believe. So anyhow, next week, I think it's 7 p.m. California time, a week from today. And I want to thank you, Chris, for coming on and being on the hot seat for a little over an hour. And my apologies to Jordan Peterson. He was scheduled to come on today, but we ran out of time. So maybe next time Jordan Peterson will be able to join us. So again,
thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you.
And thanks for everyone for hanging out and playing along at home. Take care.